I'm Sally McFarlane. I'm a program manager at the Department of Energy headquarters. And I'll ask David to introduce himself.
Hi, folks. You've probably seen a little bit too much of me by now, and certainly nice to see some new faces as well. But I'm a program manager at NOAA in the Global Ocean Monitoring and Observing Program. We have an Arctic research program that's embedded within GOMO. I'm a co-lead for the MOMP with Sally, as well as the Field Operations Community of Practice, and also a member of the integration team. So you'll probably be seeing a lot of me over the next few years, and I really look forward to working with y'all. And back to you, Sally.
Great, thanks, David. So as Hazel mentioned, we are the co-leads of the Monitoring, Observing, Modeling, and Prediction, or MOMP, foundational activity. And this is one of the new foundational activities in the new IARPC 5-year research plan. And so this is our first public community meeting that we've had, and we brought it together to bring together folks around one of our deliverables. So one of the goals of the MOMP foundational activity is to coordinate activities and communities of practice that bring together Arctic modeling, observing, monitoring, and prediction to advance Arctic research. So in this meeting, we wanted to bring together the observing and modeling communities and from different communities of practice across IARPC to discuss progress around development of synthesis products, best estimate data sets, model simulations, and model intercomparison studies from major Arctic field campaigns and long-term observational sites. And this is working towards meeting our deliverable 1.1, which I don't have up on my screen right now, but is basically about trying to make progress on these synthesis activities and thinking about how we can integrate observational and modeling studies together. And so we have 3 talks this afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. We're going to have one from the NASA Arctic Boreal Vulnerability Experiment, or above. We're going to have a talk about mosaic modeling and observational activities, and then a talk on synthesis and modeling activities using the Distributed Biological Observatory. So we hope that this set of talks, as I said, brings together folks from a lot of different communities of practice in IARPC, and also kind of shows the different ways of developing synthesis products and bringing observations and models together. So we're hoping we can learn from each other's very different experiences. So we're going to have, after each talk, we'll have a couple of minutes to take a few questions on each individual talk, but then we'd like to leave some time at the end for discussion overall. So our first speaker will be Josh Fisher, who's speaking on the NASA Above Modeling Framework.
Great, thanks, Sally, for having me. Yeah, my name is Josh Fisher. I am the modeling working group lead for NASA Above, and I have a code lead, Debbie Hunsinger from NAU. I've been the modeling working group lead since the inception of Above. Above is a 9 to 10 year project by NASA, which is unusual for programs that usually last 3 years at a time. So this is a big program, and I was on the science definition team that helped write Above, including the modeling component. So I have a big vision. How it's played out over the years, is kind of part of the vision, kind of not. It kind of depends on who's been proposing and being selected. So I'll give you a little bit of the background of Above and what we are thinking about and talking about when it comes to modeling and data. Okay, and I assume you guys can see my slides all right?
Yes, we can.
All right. And a lot of these slides are from our big Above science team meeting, which we had earlier in January. And it's nice to kick us off today for the ARPIC meeting, setting the stage and how we think about it in terms of the modeling component. So as we know, temperatures are rising disproportionately in the high latitudes. And what does this mean, especially in conjunction with rising CO2? Well, it could mean increasing productivity, longer growing season lengths, changing nutrient cycling, changing hydrology, that could be beneficial to carbon uptake. But we also know that these temperatures are thawing permafrost, again, altering hydrology, changing soil carbon, storage, and exposure and emission back to the atmosphere. And we also know that disturbances are changing in frequency, intensity, magnitude, whether it's wildfire, disease, and so on. And so we've got millennia worth of soil carbon locked up in the permafrost and soils and now being exposed. And so there's a bit of a tipping point with the Arctic boreal region that we're trying to understand and predict and project into the future. So when it comes to models, there's lots of different types of models. There's statistical models, machine learning models, there's atmospheric models, hydrology models, and so on. The models that we tend to focus on in this particular working group are terrestrial biosphere models, also known as land surface models or dynamic global vegetation models. And so we're interested in carbon, water, nutrient cycling with regards to soil, plant, atmosphere continuum. And so there's lots of different types of models. Some are coupled into larger Earth system models. Some are very site specific. Some represent plants as cohorts. Others represent plants as plant functional types, just like generally grasses and shrubs and so on. And so there's been a lot of really cool model development. This is a slide provided by Adriana Foster, Amanda Armstrong, Jackie Schumann, and others. And it shows kind of individual-based modeling, how we might predict how regrowth and growth of ecosystems responds to weather and CO2 and disturbance. And if we look at, this is an initial study that I did as part of the CARVE mission, the Carbon Arctic Reservoirs Vulnerability Experiment, and just looking at a number of models over Alaska. And we can see that blue is carbon sink, red is carbon source, and yellow is in the middle. That all these models predict kind of every possible combination of red and blue. There's no real agreement. One model is like all yellow, the other model is all blue, the other model is all red. Some have blue in the southeast, red in the northwest, and vice versa. So it is all over the place. And if we expand out to the larger domain of above, this is the above domain, which includes Canada as well. So basically the boreal zone. There's the large disagreement in the models. And so, across a lot of different variables. In the Earth system models, we've got on the left, the Earth system models, the CMIT-5 projections showing gains of carbon in the high latitudes, but our warming experiments suggest the opposite. So there's kind of a big contradiction here between data and models. And there's also just confusion among the models in terms of how much soil carbon there is, how to create steady state conditions, and how that soil carbon moves in time. What's the soil carbon sensitive to? Is it sensitive to climate? Is it sensitive to land cover change or land use change? Is it sensitive to CO2 fertilization, nitrogen deposition? So there's a lot of differences in sensitivities to carbon cycling and nutrient cycling, water cycling, and so on. And so a lot of the modelers are global modelers, but focus on the Arctic boreal region because the Arctic boreal region represents a huge chunk of uncertainty in our global understanding of net CO2 flux. Most of the rest of this would be in the tropics. So early on and above, I surveyed a lot of these modelers from throughout the world, and I asked, what are you working on? Or what needs development in your models to understand Arctic boreal region ecosystem processes? And I presented their response frequency by font size. So you can see soil carbon's big, but active layer thickness, soil moisture, soil respiration, litter biomass, freeze thaw, NPP, and so on. And so there's a lot of work being done, a lot of uncertainties. One thing that the modelers particularly express when it comes to data is that oftentimes empiricists, field teams go out and measure one variable and then go away. And then another team comes in and measures another variable. But really modelers need these data or these measurements measured concurrently, because we create response functions in the models. How does soil carbon respond to temperature? We can't just measure soil carbon once and then temperature another time to understand those response functions. So how well is carbon sampled? So here is total land. There's more in the high latitudes. This is our GPP, our photosynthesis, big breathing in the tropics. But our total carbon, while there's a lot in the tropics, there's a lot locked up in the soils of the high latitudes. And so there's kind of two poles of the carbon cycle. Now, how well is this measured? Well, most of our measurements are in rich, temperate countries. So we kind of start to get into the boreal zone, but definitely not into the Arctic region. And so we have these large uncertainties because we have had large data sparsity, which leads to all these different model contradictions. It's kind of like that old fable of the blind man and the elephant, where everyone's kind of feeling what's in front of them and disagreeing. It's a spear, it's a snake, it's a tree, and so on. And so it's kind of like, terrestrial biosphere models where some are saying it's a carbon sink, it's a carbon sink, then a source. And it depends if we include nutrients. So everybody's kind of saying something different, but everybody is saying something kind of similar. And so the idea is, if we put these understandings, these model representations, these data sets together, perhaps we can start to piece together the elephant in the room, which is the future of the Arctic boreal region. So that brings us to NASA's Above program. This is the focus area. Of course, we're interested in, as I mentioned, global aspects. We're interested in pan-Arctic aspects as well. But for the sake of NASA and the politics that be in terms of being able to operate in, Russia, which is not great, we focus on Canada and Alaska. So we are now in phase 3 of this kind of 9-year program. So we've gone a lot of years, and most of the first 2 phases were collecting data. Not so much in the model development. Now we're starting to integrate a lot more with model development. There has been some model development continuously, but essentially now we are swimming in data. There's just a ton of data from all these teams. We have been flying airplanes all over the place, collecting airborne measurements. We have set up flux sites and chambers and transects, and from wildlife to hydrology to permafrost and so on. And that's just above, in addition to all the other activities, agencies, institutions working in the Arctic boreal region. There is just an enormous wealth of data. And I think that's one of IARPIC's questions, is how do we interface this huge wealth of data with model development to reduce those uncertainties and to understand what's going to happen to the Arctic boreal region. And that has been a major question of us as well in Above. So the Above concise experiment plan, which defines the Above plan, which, if you were to look at it, is far from concise. I think it is very lengthy, but for whatever reason, we called it the ASAP and never changed that. But the modeling is kind of the interconnecting center of all the activities that have been going on, the remote sensing, because it's NASA, but as well as the field-based research that, for things that can't be done from airborne or satellites, such as soil carbon. And then how do we scale this up? And then there's this linkage to societal drivers as well. And so we have these different phases. So phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and there's benchmarking and assessment of data. And I think I'm running long on time, so I'm going to try to breeze through this real fast. Right, Sally? I'm pretty long on time already. Yeah, okay. So let's see. So this is the big question. How do we go from data to modeling? It's not so easy. We need uncertainties, right? If there's huge uncertainties on the models, but there's huge uncertainties on the data, They don't necessarily help. We need to understand scaling. How do we scale these point measurements, these flux measurements to grids, half-degree grids or 25-kilometer grids of these models? And that's a big question we've had. And so we create these functional relationships where you have these point level data or these airborne level data, and the relationships of one variable to the next are parameterized and basically mathematically imputed into models. And so we can now use these relationships from the measurements and the data and test them back into the models to see if they're representing the relationships well. And that's how we're doing with scaling. That's how we're dealing with integration of disparate data sets. And so there's thousands of variables. And so one of my projects has been to mine the data sets looking for these relationships and then matching them up with what's going on in the models. I'll skip through this, but benchmarking is huge as well, being able to test the models. And we have a big benchmarking activity, but I'm afraid that I'm pushing time. So essentially we're trying to go from the left where we've got, big uncertainties and trying to understand if there's tipping points to reduced uncertainties to, having confidence in those tipping points if they exist and so on. And let's see. So I just want to end with some of the activities that we are going on right now. So there's lots of modeling activities happening among the different groups. Some are focused more on carbon cycling, others are focused more on disturbance or vegetation processes and so on. But now we are working as a group to do common run protocols and starting to identify these functional relationships that need data constraints. And so we've got this monthly seminar and workshop series that we're running that essentially go through how we're doing our benchmarking together, how we're doing our data integration together, and how we're synthesizing those results. So with that, I will leave it there. I'm a bit over time, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of a flavor for what we're doing on the modeling activities in Above.
Great, thank you, Josh. I had lots of questions on those last couple slides. You ran through very quickly, but we'll leave it. I think there is time for a quick question if someone has one. And folks can also put questions in the chat for speakers to get back to.
Yeah, I'll look at the chat for questions. I'm happy to.
One question I had was just about, so you mentioned I think top 5 functional relationships was something you were looking at. Did those come out of the data or the models, or where did those functional relationships come from to get into your top 5?
Yeah, that's actually what we're working right now. I've been going back with emails this morning with Debbie and our team, and we're sending it out. We let the modeling working group know that this was coming. We have a survey that's going out imminently, and we're going to review it in a couple of weeks at our this month's monthly meeting to figure out what people are responding to. So I don't have an answer for that yet, but that is the hot button issue of this month.
Awesome.
But presumably it'll be something like solid carbon and temperature, or something like that. That kind of relationship.
Do you have a quick question, David?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention the comment in the chat. If the science meetings are public, if you don't mind posting the link for folks to access them, that would be great. And yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yep, I see that comment and I'll respond with information.
Okay, thank you very much. So our next speaker is Michael Gallagher, who's going to talk on mosaic synthesis. And Michael is currently at Summit Station in Greenland, so we're hoping that everything goes well. So go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, very much so. First test, can you hear me?
A little quiet.
A little quiet. Where's the microphone? How about that? Is that better?
That's a little bit better. Just turn our volumes up.
Okay. Great. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about results from Mosaic and a lot of the work that the Mosaic community has done for model evaluation, but I'm also going to talk about the Europolar prediction. So it was really enjoyable to look at the MOMP outline and some of the deliverables because it overlaps so well with what the Europolar prediction worked on and a lot of the core goals of that work. And as of this year, as of 2023, the Europolar prediction community is over, and we now are trying to move on and identify new activities. So it's the perfect opportunity to work synergistically, ideally. Next slide.
Good advanced
Are we
here.
on slide number?
We're on slide 2.
Okay, I can't see it.
Mm.
Great, I'll just pull it up on my end. Real quick. Oh, there I am. So I'm coming less from the terrestrial perspective, and that was a really fascinating and enjoyable talk, and more from the atmosphere and climate perspective. So the YOP community worked a lot on improving the forecast models and climate models, and in particular short-term improvements, so processes on the scale of minutes to hours, in order to improve forecasts for the local communities and other opportunities. And we all know that model improvement is kind of the final frontier for climate system research, because if you want to forecast, you need models. If you want to be able to project climate into the future and say something about melting ice sheets, you also need models. And if you want spatial information, like a reanalysis, you need good computational models. But in order to have good computational models, we need data, and we need data that's available and in a format that models can ingest and make comparisons with. So what we really need is high quality standardized observations and synergy in activities between modelers and observationalists in order to coordinate model improvements. So totally in line with what you guys are working on in IARPIC. Next slide.
It's advanced over here, Michael. I think there's just a bit of a lag catching up.
And sorry, this is horrifically obnoxious. I know the lag can be pretty bad. So just a quick background on the Europolar prediction. It was a WMO initiative to improve models by coordinating activities between the large modeling centers and observationalists, which is how I got involved in it. So they put out a call and they invited different people from the Arctic community to come and talk about how they can make their observations more available. And I love this paper that they did to outline the YOP activities, because it basically justifies the large suite of observational activities that are going on in the Arctic. And it calls observationalists to make more effort to make their data available to modelers for improvements. And the efforts, this paper was published in 2016, so this has been an ongoing effort for roughly the last 6 years. Next slide. Yeah, I can turn off my video. That's a great idea. Okay, so the community came together and talked about all of the best ways that we could improve models, but it really came down and narrowed on the fact that we can make massive improvements in modeling and prediction by standardizing data sets and homogenizing data sets so that we all talk the same language. So we had many, many meetings and sitting down together and coming up with a specification so that we could take observational data from the sites in this figure and model data extracted at those super sites and make direct comparisons to those data for process evaluation. So things like comparing vertical atmospheric profiles, comparing cloud properties and modeled microphysics, surface fluxes, and subsurface properties were all identified as extremely important components of the modeling systems. And we worked on getting together on getting a standardized NetCDF data format to do so. So we called this the merged data file specification, and we outlined it, and we provided a publication that outlines this. And the idea is that it produces these data sets as a legacy so that we can take the knowledge from these observational sites, encapsulate it into this merged data file, and then anyone who wants to evaluate their models on those data sets has the ability to do so, and it's well documented. But not only did we do that, we created a toolkit. So could you click next slide, please? Great. Oh yeah, sorry. I switched the order here and throw myself off. So merged data files were created to do some very specific things. It's to avoid effort on modelers' part to ingest all of the heterogeneous data from various sites so that they can improve their models and use the same processes to evaluate them at all of the Arctic supersites. And then that would therefore increase the uptake of the quality observations that we're all working so hard on. And then this would facilitate evaluation and intercomparison. So not only would the uptake of the observational data be done, but if the modelers are using the same data format, we can then facilitate these massive intercomparisons of the supersets. And we'll be doing that in order to improve the model physics for forecasts, projections, and reanalyses and so on. If you could put the next slide. Sorry, I have an echo and it's just driving me crazy, but I'm going to try to do my best to ignore it. Great. So part of the YOP team got together and we hired a programmer, and we worked with the scientists who were working at the observational supersites, and we created the merged data file toolkit. It's a free open source processing software that anyone can use and download. And it's a Python API for doing the heavy lifting of this merging. So we have a bunch of available data sets at these supersites, but we also have the code available that created that data. So hypothetically, if you dropped a deployment at some ice sheet in the Arctic and wanted to create these merged data files so that they could be evaluated by models, you can download this code and you can then process easily the data that you're taking. And it does a whole lot of lifting for you. It standardizes dimensionality and grouping and attributes, and it bookkeeps, and it tailors it to the specific needs of climate and forecasting models. And it produces these standardized files with minimal effort. So ideally, you bring the data, you download the code, and you can now create a model file that can be ingested by anyone who might be interested in evaluating these models. Next slide, please. So it's available now, and I have a couple links here. It's on Git and it's installable and you can use it. Hopefully it's entirely easy to use for anyone that would want to. But this is considered one of the key deliverables of the community. So we have YOP has come together, we've created merged data files at all of these supersites, and we've opened the code so that anyone else who wants to create such things could use them. And this is being done for Mosaic. So if you could click the next slide. Oh, it just caught up. Oh, the useful resources. It caught up. Hopefully that echo is done. So these are some links to a few of the specific resources. So there's a data portal where you can download any of the available merged data at all those supersites. There's some very targeted specific periods that we think are scientifically interesting. So that's link there. You can download the code that I've described and run it on your own data if you wanted to ingest the climate models. And we have a few papers out for publication that are under review at this exact moment. There's been a model evaluation led by Johnny Day. I'm writing a publication to describe the specification and the data sets. And we've also published a few analyses of the targeted observing periods. Next slide, please. Thanks, Hazel. I appreciate it. So a lot of the merged data file effort was specifically made in the service of Mosaic. So Mosaic was this absolutely massive campaign where a whole host of people from all across the world put in years of their lives to take a great coupled climate system data set. It includes biological drivers, it includes atmospheric drivers, ocean, sea ice measurements, a whole suite of incredible observations in the Central Arctic sea ice for the full year from September 2019 until September 2020. And the group of Mosaic observationalists have been working together in the last little bit to do exactly this, so to make those observations available for model evaluation. I've been leading an effort to create one of these merged data files, so to specifically cater to forecasting and climate predictions and these types of analyses. But there's also a group of people who are working on evaluating the other types of models available. There's nobody working on the terrestrial aspect of it yet, but we have people working on detailed single column models of snowpack properties, some other folks who are working on turbulence properties by LES and DNS evaluation, and also some ocean modelers as well. So it's a really massive effort at this point. Next slide, please. And those two photos are supposed to represent the two states of the Union. So, great. So this is just a brief advertisement for the work that I've done on the merged data files. So a lot of the important variables for forecast evaluation are in there. A lot of the things that you might not expect to get in a single sea ice data set, ocean measurements, sea ice thicknesses, cloud phase and microphysics, top of atmosphere flux, been collaborating with the folks at NASA and had some really nice conversation. So it's been a real trial by fire of a lot of what's going on, what you're talking about for MOMP in terms of getting together all the different aspects of modeling for a climate system. Next slide is just some information, but I think I'm also running out of time. So some links that you can click. We have a monthly meeting where we discuss these modeling efforts. I'm happy to get you involved in that. I also am happy to get you the data that I've been working on producing. And it would be great if more people would participate in that discussion. So if there are any questions. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Michael. Are there any quick questions for Michael? And perhaps when you get a chance, you could put the mailing list in the chat that you had on that last slide, if people are interested in joining that.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I can make my slides available.
It looks like Wilbert has a quick question.
Yes, a quick question about the single model column, the column model effort. Does that include the ocean as well, or is it just sea ice atmosphere interactions?
So they're currently, this is being led by David Clemens-Sewell at NCAR. He just transferred to a postdoc at NCAR in Boulder. And he is currently working on the atmosphere ice coupling. But I believe there has been talks about the ocean interactions as well. And I missed that because I was in transit to Greenland. I missed the last discussion. So I can't comment to that specifically, but I could put you in touch with David if you wanted to further that conversation.
Sounds good, thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, and our final talk today will be by Lee Cooper about the DBO.
Okay, great, thank you. I know a lot of you have seen some of these slides before. I want to acknowledge Jackie Grebmeyer for helping put together this presentation for me, and I'll try to breeze through the design of the Distributed Biological Observatory, or DBO as we call it for short, and just basically get to the end result that we're interested in, or what are the synthesis data products, what are we working on in terms of connecting with modelers. This program is coordinated through the Pacific Arctic Group, which has participation now from people and institutes in China, Japan, Korea, Canada, and the United States. So that's the logo in the lower right-hand corner. Get this next slide. No. Oh, okay. I'll do it this way. Just briefly, the DBO is designed to link physical processes in the Bering and the Chukchi Seas and now in the Beaufort Sea with biological and ecosystem processes in that part of the Arctic. We focus on standardized sampling. You'll see the little red boxes. Those are the places we go every year. We do this on both US and a Canadian ship also, and we also, through the Pacific Arctic Group, coordinate sampling by other countries, so Korea, Japan, and China in particular. I might mention in terms of the model for doing this standardized sampling has been attractive to others. And so there is actually development ongoing now for development of a DBO in the Atlantic, the Davis Strait, Baffin Bay area, and as well as in the East Siberian Sea outside of Russian waters and international area. And that's under development by the Koreans at the Korean Polar Research Institute, as well as IARC at UAF in Alaska. Just getting up every morning and getting these little notes about somebody's cited you, and this one was a little unusual. It's a paper that is based on work Karen Fry has done in translating ice retreat and recession in the Bering Strait region. One of our figures used in this paper, published in a mathematics journal by the first authors, a PhD student in Argentina. So our data is being used in places we wouldn't have expected. This is a mathematical model for demography of Pacific walrus based on the retreat of sea ice. So we do have use of this data that we're generating, and we're happy to see that. In terms of the sampling that we're doing, it includes temperature and CTD, chlorophyll measurements, water column plankton. We're measuring animals that live on the bottom because it's so shallow that a lot of the production goes to the bottom, seabird and marine mammal surveys, and when we can, bottom trawling and fisheries acoustics. And we've also, through cooperation with other investigators, incorporated moorings at each of those DBO boxes in Alaskan waters, as well as satellite observations that we share internationally through the Pacific Arctic Group meetings, which are held twice a year in different locations, either in Asia or North America. I wanted to just emphasize some of the NASA recently has really stepped up the game in terms of the products they're providing. This at the time that Joey Camiso was working for NASA, it was more of a static website that I give you the link there below. Now real time and includes all of the DBO boxes that we have, and presumably will expand to all the other DBO areas as they're put together. The raw data that's behind these figures and animations is available now, and so I would say this is a resource that's worth looking at, and it's based on some of these plots. This is a paper that's in revision and resubmitted to PLOS One to look at the different DBO boxes. One is the most southern, 8 is the furthest east in the Beaufort Sea. The change in sea surface temperatures at different times of the year, the disappearance of ice, chlorophyll, primary production, all of these data estimated from satellite measurements. And so Karen in particular has taken this on in terms of looking at where the production and chlorophyll in this region has increased. You can see our little boxes implied on the map. I would just call your attention to July, which is when we go through on the Canadian ship, the Sir Wilfrid Laurier, and you can see that the green markings that indicate an increase in chlorophyll, we don't actually see that in July, and that matches up with the data that we've collected. So even though production is increasing where we're doing sampling in the Bering and the Chukchi Seas within those boxes, it hasn't actually changed in July, but overall mean annual productivity is increasing based on the satellite measurements and in grams carbon per meter squared per year per decade. One set of examples, this is the measurements. These are the measurements we make every July. We've been doing this now since the year 2000, every year, except for 2020. We weren't able to go because of COVID. So just a couple of examples. These are the measurements that we're going back and looking at in terms of has chlorophyll changed over time, and at least in July at the places that sample, it doesn't look like there's been significant trends. We also collect other water chemistry. This is dating back to 1987, and you can see the green dots the more ancient samples that were collected in the 80s and the 90s have more oxygen 18 in them than the ones collected more recently. This is normalized for the water flowing through Bering Strait, and this can be matched up with the freshwater flux through the Bering Strait, and we can actually go back and make guesswork about based on the changes in the oxygen 18 content of water that is going to flow through Bering Strait and get to the level of the Arctic Ocean halicline as to whether that water, how much fresh water is embedded within that, and fresh water has increased just as the mooring measurements in Bering Strait have indicated. So it's an independent measure of freshwater flow through Bering Strait. We do this work in the summer on the Sir Wilfrid Laurier with Canadian colleagues. It's a joint program. They bring the CTD, and so we are cooperating with Fisheries and Oceans Canada in making that data that's available, that you see here, also available. Let's say, and then, so what's the end result? We've seen this persistent biologically active areas. We've identified them, and that's why those boxes are where they are. We know a lot of productivity and a lot of biomass, and it has a lot to do with the physical features. There are nutrients and high chlorophyll down to the seafloor. And this is just an example from the past decade. The different colors correspond to different dominant animals at each of these sites. So, for example, the yellow are polychaetes or marine worms. The brown are bivalves, and that makes sense as to where we see walruses, for example, in the winter, both just north of Bering Strait as well as southwest of St. Lawrence Island. And then because we've got enough data, this is on the time is on a horizontal axis. This is changes in biomass over time. So you can see that certain areas like slip 1 and 2, these are the most southerly sites we sample every July, that the biomass has decreased in the last decade, whereas it's increased at the more northern area at slip number 4. And just another example, this is north of Bering Strait in this very productive area that certain clam species, for example, have come in there and then in other cases have disappeared. So there's some population dynamics that's also embedded in all of this that we're working on analyzing. But these data about where the prey are, for example, walruses, this has been used, Chad Jay's group in USGS, Alaska Science Center have used this to predict walrus foraging areas relative to where we have identified prey that's on the seafloor. So there are a couple of 3 different types of models or formulas that have been looked at in terms of concepts. There's pelagic benthic coupling, where we're concerned with how much material is in the water column and how fast it gets to the seafloor. We also think that advective conceptual models are useful and helpful because the seasonal current flow changes and is influenced by how much carbon deposition is in that water as it flows north. And then there is also a published Arctic marine pulses model that involves a combination of advective material being moved north. And here's just a couple of illustrations of what those models look like in terms of pelagic benthic coupling and what we think will happen as sea ice continues to disappear in terms of the illustrations. So, and then this is the Arctic pulses model that Sue Moore published with co-authors in 2016. Just to be brief and to wrap up, we are sharing our data with a couple of funded projects already. Matt Fitzpatrick, who's at the Appalachian Lab, has expertise in random forest models, is looking at some of our physical and biogeochemical measures, that is things like the grain size of the sediments, the total organic carbon, total organic nitrogen, relative to temperature, and then sorting that out as to what is the best predictor of where we're seeing production, where we're seeing the different ecosystems sort out. And we are also, in a small way, cooperating with a North Pacific Research Board funded project led by Libby Lagerwell out at NOAA in Seattle. And this is geared towards conceptual models and also involving human communities in terms of the impacts on food security. Let me think if I got anything more. I think that's the end of my 10-minute talk, and I think I stuck pretty close to 10 minutes. I went through it real fast. Be happy to answer any questions if there are any that I can handle. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Lee. Do we have any questions for Lee? I have a quick one, which is, we heard in the last talk about standardized data sets and a little bit, I think, in the above talk as well. And I was wondering if you have had issues with that, or if because the project was sort of designed from the start that you sort of set your data standards and your formats at the beginning, or if you had to work on standardizing.
I think with cooperation with other countries, it's always a work in progress, both the sharing of the data and standardizing. We've set out and done things, and I think there's still work to be done to accomplish that, to have fully transparent, use the same, and it's a distributed observatory, so we're not all absolutely using the same methods. When we measure chlorophyll, we use 90% acetone, but there are other solvents, and some of the Asian scientists prefer to use that and think that that's a better way of extracting chlorophyll. So there's some give and take.
Okay, I guess open it up for general discussion or other questions. I think it's been quite interesting to see the different approaches across these kind of three areas, or the more atmospheric focused, ocean focused, and terrestrial focused, all dealing with similar challenges, but slightly different approaches. I guess maybe a question back to each of you would be sort of, what is the biggest challenge you've had in trying to think about synthesizing this vast wealth of data that each of these projects has collected? Maybe I'll start with you, Lee, since you were last.
I think we're always wondering why we didn't budget more money for thinking about stuff at the end of the project. I mean, we're still going out twice this summer, once with NOAA funding and once with NSF funding. And and the other problem we have is the biological data. Actually identifying the animals that we bring back preserved takes a while. So people have been asking, well, what happened during the warm period in 2017 and 2018 when there wasn't, or 2018, 2019, when there was hardly any sea ice? And we're not there yet because we're still analyzing the samples. So the time commitment and probably the money commitment too, to get the work done, and do that synthesis and connect with people, is a challenge.
Great, thank you. Josh, would you comment on what you think the challenges are?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, I agree with Lee. There's obviously funding that is required to make these activities happen, but I mean, this is not the first time NASA's done a big 10-year program like this. There was a 10-year program in the tropics before, and what we know is that the modeling activities continue for years after the main program and data collection happens, and so it's just kind of a course of evolution, but there has to be that funding support. But one of the challenges, to respond to your question, is in making sure that the modelers know how to access the data, this wealth of data, and actually how to leverage this wealth of data, as opposed to 10% or just a portion of the data. So I think there's some data cataloging, organization, communication, work that needs to be done, and then there's just a lot of work that needs to be done by the modelers. And that's non-trivial. Any minor change to a model can blow up a whole model. And so it is a lot to ask to say like, use all this data, and it'll make your model better. So there is this challenging activity, a series of activities that will go on for years. But hopefully this campaign from above will help provide a lot of that data that has just simply been missing for the models. So.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I do think it's a challenge to think about using, all of the data that's been collected. I know a lot of times there can be a focus around a golden day or a golden case, and maybe 5% of the data gets 90% of the attention, but thinking about all this wealth of data and how to make it all accessible and usable. Michael?
Yeah, as I hope was obvious through my talk, I think that's kind of the challenge in terms of getting everyone to agree on what's important inside of standardization. I think we came to getting a shared language and agreeing to it as important at the outset of the projects, so that it was a key deliverable that we wanted to produce those data sets. This was a big part of Mosaic, for example. We recently had a meeting to sit all together, and getting all of the different people who make all the different kinds of observations to sit down and say, we want to create this product and make it easy to use. And once that happens, you do it, and it gets used. Then, at least from our perspective, a lot of people start picking up the data. But it's really hard to get the shared language, and it's a difficult problem because everybody has a different need. So to some extent, it's like was just said, you can't make everything easier.
Great, thank you. David?
I wanted to sort of follow up on some of the comments. I certainly heard some of these similar comments from Mosaic folks about making sure that you actually you've already gone through the trouble of investing in this massive the massive field program. I'm sure this also applies to above, and it certainly applies to DBO. I wonder whether there are other messages that we should be in a world where folks are constantly thinking about the next new shiny thing that they can provide support for. I wonder whether there are messages that that we should be thinking about. I hear and we should be thinking about that maybe are beyond what we typically think about in terms of programming resources. I hear one, meticulous maintenance of metadata, two, making sure that you actually fund synthesis. I recognize from working with Jackie and Lee regularly how difficult it is to get field work actually done and funded in an appropriate way. Then I hear about data standardization, as well as developing shared language in order to actually get get those data out and available. I wonder whether there are other things that we should be thinking about to sort of to think about how we. I think the legacy. Yes, there's publications. Yes, there's models. There's all these things, but how do we make sure that we do proper justice to the real legacy of these programs, which is the data, and making sure that everybody gets access to them. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, David. Matt?
Yeah, David, I'm one of those people that you were probably just referring to. We've had this conversation before, but I think from a funding standpoint, that it's a lot of the important data work is stuck in the middle, right? It's sexy to go on a new project. It's sexy to write some paper. But the in-between part is a lot of what these presentations have been about, is how do we actually package data or get data into the same kind of frame of reference? And, in the end, that's not that appealing. And it's not something that's easy to really wave a flag and say, look, this great thing we did, right? But it's kind of the nuts and bolts part of getting from point A to point B and enabling a lot more of that point B being the analysis part, because the startup is so hard for some people, right? Especially if you have all kinds of different data from different types of disciplines fitting together. The startup is really hard there. if you have to try to ingest that all yourself and figure out what it means. And so somehow it would be really useful within some of the funding mechanisms to identify that activity in the middle as really valuable. And I know there are some mechanisms, but I just think it's important to emphasize that.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. I do want to acknowledge that we're at the top of the hour, so if people need to drop off, feel free to do so. We will not judge you harshly because we understand people have other things on their calendars, but if people do want to stay on and continue the discussion for a few minutes, that's fine as well. Any further follow-up to Matt's comments, David?
I just wanted to thank all the speakers and Matt particularly for the thoughtful comment. I think it's something that we have to sort of take back to our IARPIC, sort of the Fed community, and make sure that we're actually thinking toward how to support these programs, because the data archiving, the assembly, the maintaining the meticulous maintenance of metadata takes a significant amount of time, as Matt and really all the speakers were saying, and it's not necessarily something that folks find as appealing to support, but it's not something that we can expect, our base funded investigators to do as a part of their regular work. They're doing the field work, which is acquiring the data, which is critical. So I think it's a long-term homework problem that we have to figure out how to address, so that we actually get the most bang for the buck, and the broader community benefits from these data.
I think it's certainly something that needs to be considered in the, in the planning and initiation stages of these large projects. And I guess my impression is that it's starting to be considered more at those planning and initial stages, but there's probably still more work to be done there, and more of these kinds of, I think, tools and examples that we're starting to see from some of these large projects that maybe we can build on for future projects, right? So that everyone doesn't have to reinvent the wheel each time from scratch, hopefully.
Yeah, and it's striking too that we're probably already past the point where it's manageable, but we're very quickly and very rapidly increasing the amount of data that we can collect in very short periods of time. So if there were ever a time to solve some of these problems, or come up with a methodology to solve these problems, it would be now rather than any time in the future. So,
Josh?
Yeah, I think in terms of future work and activities and syntheses and shiny new objects, as part of the discussion, one thing that IARPIC can do on the NASA side, and NASA responds very well and sensitively to community input, such as by IARPIC, is if IARPIC, stated to essentially Hank Margolis, who runs above, and NASA headquarters, that IARPIC encourages NASA to continue to support model data syntheses beyond the lifetime of above, which will achieve collective objectives in reducing uncertainties and understanding the archipelago region. So if there's IARPIC comment to headquarters on interest in that, headquarters Margolis is likely to respond favorably and positively to allocating budget to support those types of syntheses activities.
Thank you. I think that's, certainly one thing I would say, I guess, in, the IARPIC research plan and the implementation plan, I guess, specifically that these deliverables, like the one we're talking about today, were developed, do have buy-in by many agencies to be included in the implementation plan. So I do think that the agencies are recognizing the importance of this, that it's just It's a lot of work to be done. With that, maybe any final comments? All right, well, thank you so much to our speakers and for the discussion. I think it was very useful, and we will, the slides will be up on the website, I think soon, and this recording will be available as well if you have any colleagues who weren't able to attend and you want to pass information on to them. So thank you very much.
Thank you.